Immigration Nation, the Canada version. I'm Mark Holthe, Canadian immigration lawyer, and I am here today with another awesome guest, another awesome immigration lawyer practicing out in the wonderful city of Vancouver, where the weather is always beautiful and nice, except maybe arguably in the winter where it's a little bit overcast. But hey, that's better than the snow we have here in Alberta. So today is all about Canadian citizenship, and you're going to learn things today that you probably were never aware of. One of the key segments in a new immigrant's journey is that realization of Canadian citizenship. We're going to talk about that in just 5 seconds. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to flip my screen over here and welcome in Alex Stojicevic, who I've been practicing the pronunciation of his name for quite some time. Not too bad. Thumbs up. Welcome, Alex. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
Awesome. So tell everyone a little bit about you. So you're a practicing immigration lawyer. You're one of the pillars of our immigration bar, and it's a privilege for me to have you on the show. And so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, we don't want my head to get any sweller than this, okay? I'm just trying to keep it this size right now.
See, I have the ability to enlarge it here. See, I can do this.
No, don't do that. So yes, I'm in immigration law quite by accident. An accident that occurred back in 1995. I'm unfortunately going to name names. So
good. Do.
There it is. I had finished articling at Pryke Lambert Leithley Russell, which is a firm in Richmond, and I had a great articles. Those were great guys. I wanted to stay there, but unfortunately, 1995, the economy wasn't great out here or in most of Canada at the time. But an opportunity did present itself through one of the partners to go and work for one of their friends. Who was Dennis McRae.
Dennis.
Who had recently had parted with Elizabeth Bryson, who is another former chair of our section, and there was a vacancy. And so I was, I think, the only person interviewed, and that was on May 1st, 1995. And well, I have been an immigration lawyer ever since.
There you are. The rest is history. So tell me about your firm now. So what is your firm now? So MKS.
So MKS, yes, it's the brand we've gone with. I mean, I started the firm with Gordon Maynard back in 2002 when we left McRae and Associates, which is itself a famous story.
Absolutely.
But all is good with all of us now, so that's fine. It gave me the opportunity to have worked for 2 years with one of your previous guests, Kyle Heineman.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Anyway, we started our own firm in November of 2002, and then in May of 2005, Rudy Kisher joined us from what was then the embryonic piece of embarkation law,
okay. And
we became MKS. So today we have six lawyers, 7 on letterhead, 6 that are actually in the office, and last count 15 staff. So we're 21 people.
Great. That's awesome. I know you've had your hand in a lot of policy development in our country, a lot of interesting things that have transpired, both, you know, the one I think I was most interested in was with ESDC and some of those, the litigation involved with their crazy policy decision making and all that kind of stuff.
But yes, well, one of the cases that I am that I had the pleasure of dealing with was a 6-month federal court application by 2 unions supported by the BC Federation of Labor to try to block 200 foreign workers coming from China to work in a mine in northeastern British Columbia, on grounds that were nonsensical, in my view, and the court ultimately upheld that. The whole case was based on a premise that the company had been advertising for Chinese-speaking workers, which turned out to not be true at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, as a result of that case, my counterparts on the other side, who did a very, very good job of arguing their side, I think won the PR war in that
Mhm.
the regulation that we have today about, you have to speak English or French and you
Yep.
can't advertise in another language is directly attributed to that case.
Yep.
The HD mining specialized construction workers case.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
but that was fun. 22 days in court over 6 months.
Wow. Yeah, that's a huge. Everything else kind of grinds to a halt, right? It just becomes
Absolutely.
everything that you
Yeah.
deal
So
with.
that was completely all consuming. And it's been 8 years now. So
Yeah, it's hard to
yeah,
believe.
so it's hard to
Yeah.
believe. But you had some of really like a lot of, I was blessed to be involved in that case with some really excellent lawyers on both sides. We had Laura Best, who acted for one of our somebody on our side as well, and Lauren Weldman acted for the unions as well as the union lawyers themselves. And I think really it was a heck of an experience. I mean, when you're
Mm.
stuck with other people for that long, boy, you better
You better
get
get along.
along.
Absolutely. Well, that's
So
awesome. Mhm.
yeah, no,
So many
there's that. And
stories.
I mean, I've been very lucky in that I've worked only in specialized immigration boutiques that did a variety of things. And really, like we're a dinosaur. I don't know that there are hundreds of firms like ours anymore that do both litigation and um, the solicitor side of our work. And I've been blessed to be exposed to both and seeing
Yeah.
how they've evolved. So from that perspective, I'm very lucky, and I count my blessings. In terms of my involvement with the CBA, there most of my time was spent. I was in your seat 12 years ago, 13 almost now. And then after my run as a table officer, I actually went and volunteered on the committee that oversees all the sections for 2 years, which was really challenging, I have to say. It was during a time of, unfortunately, some turmoil in the CBA. So that was quite the learning experience. I just finished with that recently. So there you are.
Yeah, and it's great. The fun part about this discussion today is that we get to talk about something cool, right? Something that I think is one of the most valuable things that really exist out there. I'm a little biased, and that's Canadian citizenship. And
Well,
I'll tell you, Alex, I remember when I was serving a mission for my church in Portugal, and I had as missionary companions a lot of other missionaries from the US. And this was back, it was 92 to 94. And there wasn't a lot of great feelings between the US and Portugal for a number of reasons. I think it was just shortly after was it the Gulf War? I can't remember what was going on. But anyways, there was not some great feelings. So I would always wear my Canadian flag pin everywhere I went.
right.
And people were so friendly to me, to the point where some of my companions would just say they were Canadian too, and then they had far less hassle. But I think globally, it means something to be a Canadian citizen. There is a recognition that genuinely we're decent people, and our country is pretty awesome. And we look at the how competitive it is internationally for immigrants, and how popular we are, right? But many people don't talk a lot about citizenship. It's always about getting here as a PR. And so maybe
Well,
you can talk
look,
a little bit about that.
so our recent history with citizenship is one where the pendulum has swung in many directions. Okay, like if you go back 20 years ago, citizenship was actively encouraged, and perhaps if we erred on the side of not really doing a lot of background checking people's residence, and that sort of thing. And unfortunately, what that resulted in was a pendulum swing backwards, where we had in the mid 2000s, really up until 2014, 2015, enormous amounts of scrutiny, probably overkill, where, I mean, I don't know if you recall those days, but there was a day at one point where 40% of people were getting residence questionnaires, which were really supposed to be for routine, which were not being supposed to be used for routine cases. But in the end, if you're using them for 40%, my God, that becomes
Yeah.
routine. And and for legitimate reasons, you don't want to, you want to make, you want to keep enforcement reasonably robust. That's understandable. But I think what it did is it detracted from, it created disincentives, and especially on the fee side, that I think are not very helpful. Um, Canada, sure. I mean, what you were doing when you showed your PIN and what people gain once they're Canadian citizens, that's a great thing. But we gain, Canada gains. We gain once immigrants become full participating members in society, and they have their say in elections, they have their say in standing for office, and they have their say in being able to tell all the rest of us that, look, you have a great country and we love this and that part, but maybe this thing over here needs to change. That's an important part of renewal in a country such as ours, and should not be discouraged, in my view, should be encouraged. And it's a tough balance. Obviously, you don't know, where the line always is in terms of being careful in that people can meet residency obligations, etc. But now that really, keeping track of people worldwide is easier than ever. It's much more difficult to sort of lie on your application and become a citizen if you're not here. So I would argue that really there's no excuse to not encourage citizenship. And I mean, and that was an election issue in the last election because the fees have gotten so high. I mean, really,
Right.
for a family of four,
Yeah.
you're looking at a $1,500 bill to apply for citizenship, which, in my view, simply results in poor people not applying. And this has some negative impacts in terms of our world. Like, how many cases have we seen in Canada where somebody's child ends up, being criminally inadmissible for something they did, even though had they gotten citizenship, they're part of our fabric, and yet they're treated differently because somebody put off the citizenship decision.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is we need them all to be citizens, because the more citizens we have here, I mean, immigration isn't, in a country such as ours, is not just about the immigrant. It's about what the immigrant contributes. The process of making someone a citizen, I mean, I don't know about your experience, Mark, but mine is a lot of clients learn a lot about Canada, maybe a lot more than people born here about Canada, and they become quite passionate about Canada as a result. So that learning process, which comes maybe after they're here 3 years or 4 years, is incredibly valuable to them, but to us as well as a society. And the role that plays in terms of them being fully engaged citizens really can't be understated, because this is the first time that this has ever, and for many of them, this ever happened, right? And with the worldwide trend being more towards dual citizenship being allowed, I mean, when I started in practice, it was inconceivable that an Australian would go for dual citizenship. That's routinely done now.
Yep.
Germans and Dutch, also people who would never get citizenship, because they were afraid that they would lose their own. Increasingly, they can do it as well. Yep. Immigrants from India, how many stories do you know about a family member not taking out citizenship because they're afraid of losing land rights in India or somewhere else, right? I mean, now with more opportunity to be a dual citizen and the myths around that being somewhat put to rest, I think increasingly, the value of citizenship for us meaning Canadian society, should be emphasized over just the value to that individual.
Yeah. You have some people here already that are agreeing with you. Absolutely agree, says Diane here. When I think about
immigration in Canada is about nation building, right? And
Yeah.
if that last step isn't taken, it's a problem because people will remain, in my view, incomplete. And once they are fully, citizens, um, there's a reason those oath ceremonies are so emotional, right? I mean, it's a big deal to people because of what it means to them. But what we often lose sight of is how important it is to us. So I've belabored this point now a few times, so
Yes.
I'll
Yeah.
leave it be.
No. And when you think about it, yeah, there's lots of people that are agreeing that when you think about this, I think to a large extent, it means so much to them because they know where they came from. Like to live in a country where the rule of law actually protects you, where you don't have to be in fear that if you're not aligned with the current political party, or whatever factions in control, that it could mean, not only loss of employment or opportunities, but literally your life, to come to a country where you're truly free and you have opportunities that are genuine and real. Like it's no wonder how much people value that citizenship. And when they get that opportunity, the thing that I've seen, Alex, is just what they do with it. It is so amazing to look back and see what these immigrants who come from nothing, who in their countries would have had no opportunity to advance through the class system. And when they come to Canada and there are no artificial constraints on them, what they can accomplish and what they can do. And I think that's to a large extent why our minister, Mendicino, he's had a series of announcements, a series of broadcasts, even recently, where he has indicated how important newcomers, new immigrants are to our economic recovery, let alone the cultural, enrichment that we receive as a result of them being here. So
No, listen, that's all fine, but and I agree with everything you've said there, Mark. But I think it's important to emphasize that rule of law that you refer to, those institutions, all of that needs renewal,
yeah,
right? How many Canadians people born here, have basically become post-political in their attitudes? Everything works well, so I don't have to care about it, right?
yeah, yeah,
That sort of apathy is a constant problem. And what I find by people going through the citizenship process, by learning about different parts of Canada, maybe parts they haven't been to, by learning about our Indigenous peoples, learning about the founding history of Canada, learning about the industries and even those kinds of basic facts, but most importantly about the way rule of law is maintained here. At the end, when they get the oath administered to them, yes, they now have a stake in the system, which is important, an emotional tie, which is important, but they've also been educated to some extent, about what that means. And the process of renewal really rests with them, right? Because, I mean, look, there's a lot of people here are way too complacent.
yeah,
And when rule of law erodes through populism or through apathy, the bulwark against that has to be renewal, in my view. And it's an important, and there shouldn't be barriers to it, in my view. Like in my ideal world, I wouldn't even have a fee for citizenship. I mean, in the last election, the government ran on a platform, this of course is before the pandemic, to eliminate the $630 fee or greatly reduce it. It was in the mandate letter for the minister that they would do
that's
this.
right. Yeah, it
They
was.
haven't done it yet. But what I would encourage everyone who is applying to do is hang on to those receipts. You may be getting a refund if you applied this year. And you shouldn't delay the application, in my view, anymore. I mean, yes, there's been a nightmare with the way the applications have been sitting unprocessed. But we're moving, I think, in the right direction when it comes to those. And to go through the history of this during the pandemic,
Yeah, let's talk about
if
that.
we can move on to that.
Yeah, let's talk about what we've seen happen as a result of the pandemic, the impact it's had on that process of applying for citizenship.
So, Mark, as you know, and as some of your listeners would probably know as well, the way the model that was followed was essentially you submit an application to a centralized processing center, and that application was always on paper, right? Which is an important thing to emphasize. And the application, although not a terribly difficult one, and one always wondered why on earth they couldn't just digitize these things, but
Yeah.
whatever. That started in Sydney. That initiated a round of background checks. And what I don't think people often understood is that the citizenship certificate was actually created at the front end. So it may have taken you 9 months to get your citizenship, but your citizenship certificate was created in the first 12 weeks, okay? And sat there in your file, the physical file that went across the country to where you were being processed. The second stage was typically after they did background checks on you and reviewed the material that you provided, you'd be called for a test. And the model for testing varied slightly country to country, but by and large involved big groups of people being called into a centralized location and 50 people taking the test, right? And then the test would have to be marked, and you would find out what your result was sometime later. And then you were called to a big ceremony where, again, 50 fellow new citizens would be called. And this was often popular for dignitaries and politicians to also, do some PR at, etc.
Yep.
I mean, no one's faulting them for this, but I mean, this was how this was done. Then you have the pandemic, and all of a sudden, none of this is possible.
Yeah.
All of our immigration centers closed, and you can't go in person to a test or to an oath ceremony. So literally, citizenship stops. And I mean, I would argue that between March and September, it stopped completely.
Completely. Yep.
And I have to say that really, in terms of where we're at, I mean, we talk about the minister saying, hey, we only let in 184,000 immigrants. And, we're going to have to catch up. But what did this do to citizenship? I mean, there's people that are backlogged to 2019 who still haven't had tests.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that's
that's
Max here. I was just going to say, it looks like Max here. He said that this is his dream stage and he's awaiting citizenship. So he could very well be caught in this, this vortex that so many people have been caught in, which, like you alluded to originally, earlier in the start of this episode, just there's a little bit of a souring of citizenship because of the hurdles that we faced. So yeah, so keep continuing. Yeah, please.
So the first challenge that they tackled was the oath ceremony. They figured out how to do that virtually. My understanding is with help of third parties and with charity support. It wasn't entirely on their own that they came up with this, the department. And they enabled a sort of digital, sort of Zoom-like platform for the oath ceremony. The trick with that, and I mean this ended up being a small problem, is that the citizenship regulations require you to be in Canada if a judge is going to administer the oath to you. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean you can't be abroad when your oath is administered, but it has to be administered by somebody else, a foreign service officer, which is a specific designation at Global Affairs. And I mean, given that most of our visa posts spent 2020 closed, right? And if you were in certain parts of the world, you wouldn't have a visa post nearby anyway. Effectively, what this meant was that you had to be in Canada to have the oath ceremony administered to you. But by and large, I mean, I didn't hear any large problems with that when they tested it, and it seemed to work. And they started to at least clear the backlog when it came to oath ceremonies. So that was the first stage, if you will, of bringing in the technology. The second thing that they tried is really what is a welcome change overall, and that is the online test. So instead of being called into a centralized location now, what they are effectively doing is sending you a link. And that link is good for 21 days. the link requires you to have reasonably good internet at home or wherever you're going to do this, this test. You need to have either Safari or Chrome. They're not really, they haven't accommodated any other browsers like Microsoft Edge, for example, or Firefox, nothing like that. And those of you who want to use your, Tor browsers, those don't work.
Not going to work
either. No. So it's basically Google and Safari. They haven't got it so that it works on a phone, but it'll work on a desktop, laptop, or tablet. So in my view, I think that's reasonably good start.
That's interesting. So it's not working yet on a handheld device.
It's not yet working on a handheld device. They've only been able to get it down to a tablet. So,
considering 90% of the people that interact with, immigration do so on their handheld devices, that's interesting.
It's true, right? And I mean, hopefully in the next iteration they can make something work in terms of that. But the way it then works is this: they verify your identity using a QR code system and matching the identity documents you provided in your application with what you're showing them when you start the test. And once that verification is in place and you start the test, you have 30 minutes to finish it. And if you lose your connection, you can dial back in, but you're stuck with that 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Now, before everyone gets too upset about the 30-minute part, this is a 20-question test, okay? And let me give you the cheats right now, all right?
Okay.
It's 20 questions. 4 or 5 of them are always on citizenship rights, citizenship responsibilities, and voting procedures. So people memorize those sections. Those will be asked.
Okay, you better restate those again, because in case people didn't, let's see what I've got here. I'm gonna go back here. I'm ringing the bell. That means Alex is gonna say something important. I guess I could also applaud just to get people's attention here. Okay, right, the reality is, listen to this. This is tips for the test.
So I have watched 26 years of iterations of the citizenship test. In no iteration of this test were not asked questions about the following 3 areas. Citizenship rights. Now, these are the rights that somebody gains by becoming a citizen. Those are usually in 2 pages in the booklet. Memorize them. The next questions they ask, and this is a bit editorializing for my part, are the responsibilities of citizenship. Whereas the rights never change, the responsibilities do, depending on the flavor of the month with the government in power. So, for example, sometimes your responsibilities in previous versions were maintaining the heritage of Canada and the importance of its history. At the moment, it's protecting the environment for future generations. Regardless, those responsibility sections are going to be asked about, so you must have that memorized. And then in every version of the citizenship test going back 25 years, there is 1, often 2 questions on voting procedure. So as silly as it sounds, make sure that you have memorized all their little pictures and who votes when, under what circumstances, because that will always be asked.
Great. Look at who's tuning in here. Mr.
I've never heard of him. Are we speaking the right language? Bonjour, David.
David was he was my first guest on episode 1 of Immigration Nation. Good to see you tuning in, David. David's he's an immigration lawyer out in Quebec. So welcome. See, you get all kinds watching this, all kinds.
That's right. So essentially that's how they're doing it. And what I anticipate is that this is the new normal for the next little while. But there might be an element of permanence to this. And the reason I say that is that whereas the oath ceremony, look, it's a big deal, and it should be a big deal, and it should be public, and people should celebrate it. And there needs to be an official involvement with it. But the test I'm not sure there's any reason to have government space tied down for a citizenship test where you can verify people's identity online reasonably easily. So, and I mean, the benefits, in my view, to a large extent outweigh the costs. Like if you take where you know, your average person in Lethbridge, or in Medicine Hat, or in Kelowna, or in Cranbrook, or in Kenora, Ontario, or in, you know, Antigonish, Nova Scotia. What these people all have in common is they don't have an immigration office nearby. So the government, if they're going to have a citizenship test, have to do some ad hoc arrangement, right? So if you're not in a major center, you have to travel. And I mean, you know, it's a disadvantage to people,
Yeah.
and it's yet another disincentive. Whereas if you can do this test at home, it's less of one, and I'm for anything that creates less of a disincentive.
Yes, I agree. Anything that can help speed up the process and make it just less cumbersome. Okay, so here's a question I have for you. Like, do you think the test itself really serves any purpose? Like, do you
I
think
think,
so what value does it have in the process? Because, you know, obviously there's, you know, some people that maybe are not as good at memorization as others, but, you know, and that's maybe the teacher in me that's coming out. But what purpose does the test serve, do you think?
well, okay, look, I mean, the purpose of the test has evolved over time. Okay, I mean, it was a formality and treated as such for a long time. I mean, certain well-known NGOs here in the Lower Mainland of Greater Vancouver area were notorious for teaching the citizenship test in both Cantonese and Mandarin, and where they would teach you to identify the test questions based on the first two letters of the English word. So you didn't even have to speak English in order to be able
Wow.
to pass the test. Okay.
Wow.
That went on through the 90s and 2000s here, right up until 2010. So, so you're right. There's some concerns around that test. But that said, the benefit of the test itself is it gets people to read the booklet, and it gets people to go through the study guide. And the study guide and the review of it um, is a useful exercise because it gets people to engage with the material. And it's far more user friendly than it was 20 years ago, in my view.
Yeah.
Okay. It's both more relevant to people and it's more user friendly. And the government's invested some money in trying to make it that way.
Yeah.
And it's that interaction with the material that that is the real benefit to Canada. It's not if you get 15 out of 20 right. Okay. Um, Now the question you have there about, you know,
Yeah.
learning disability, I'm only actually talking about a couple of the pages. The rest of it, you just need to familiarize yourself well enough that you're asked a question, you can get through it. And if you fail because of a learning disability, or you know, you can ask for an exemption, and they can do a test with you over the phone, you and an officer, or in person when we do allow for in-person um, applications as well, meetings as well. So I think it is useful. And I mean, ideally, in my ideal world, you'd have a course and you
Yeah.
would sit the course.
Yep.
But that wouldn't eliminate the requirement of a test necessarily to see if you just, you know, if you learn the material or not. And then, unfortunately, the course is expensive. I mean,
Yep. Yep.
and as we said, you have to strike a balance here between barrier and using citizenship as an education tool at the same time.
Yep.
So,
And I'll weigh in here too, Alex. I'm agreement. I'm in full agreement. I think a test is important for the exact reason that you described. It requires you to actually read and learn and understand whatever it is the party in power feels is important in terms of Canadian citizenship. Because like you said, that test has been kind of reworked
but
in
I
a
mean,
number of different
I don't want to
variations.
cast any aspersions on either party in power. I think this
Yeah.
is, you know, whether they were the liberals or the conservatives in the
Mm-hmm.
last 50 years.
Yeah.
The point is that's a perspective that exists in the Canadian public.
Yes.
And, you know, if you learn it, that's useful to you, it seems to
Absolutely.
me, to understand
Absolutely. Yeah, I
how this
agree.
place works,
Mhm.
you know, and if you understand it, you'll be able to engage in it.
Yeah.
I mean, I participated in a previous life. This is back in 2000. I participated in something that still floats around Knowledge Network here in Vancouver, the BC Ethnocultural Council, which I was one of the founding members of.
Mhm.
We did a constitutional conference for everybody else. So this was the idea that, you know, not founding peoples, but immigrant groups tackling Canada's constitutional problems. And we had, you know, round tables with people from every, you know, um, every ethnic background in Vancouver that we could find. And we tackled a lot of the same constitutional challenges and discussed them in an open forum that people did. I mean, okay, not to the same extent. I'm overselling this a little bit, but they would have at Meech Lake or in the debate around Meech Lake that was in the public, for example. What that experience taught me is that if people are given the tools to even get the basic understanding, and if you can light the spark to get them to engage with the material, after that, there is no question that people won't be able to tackle. And that's why this is important, because how many future leaders are we not lighting the spark under if we restrict citizenship? That's my question every time I go down this road. We just don't know until people get the opportunity to engage. And I mean, listen, I'm, you know, it's all very nice about. I mean, the person that she emailed, it's great that she's passionate about Canada, but Canada needs to be passionate about its new citizens.
Yeah.
This is a nation building exercise. People don't understand Canadian history very well in the 19th century. We lost more people leaving Canada than moved here because we were a somewhat closed society economically, mercantilist in its view, and we only let in a relatively limited subset of people. And even so, what we let in, more people left than we retained. It took us 100 years to catch up to that being wrong thinking. And now, for us to be an open trading country, and open to ideas and to economic growth and to social and cultural awareness and to get at the same time the populations that we need to tackle a lot of our structural problems going forward and to be self-reliant. You know, we're all complaining today that we don't have domestic manufacturing capacity for vaccines. Well, remember, we're a country of 38 million. A lot of those barriers wouldn't exist if we had 50 or 60 million people here. So we need to be passionate about retaining our citizens. They're our future. I mean that literally. They're our future. Like, this country becomes much more important in every metric if there were 50 million of us or 52 million of us. Obviously, you have to do it in a reasonable way. But at the same time, it's critical that it happens. And there should be, you know, the barriers to it, we always need to be conscious of.
I agree. You know, the thing that comes to mind as I hear you talking about the importance of us bringing in immigrants and transitioning them to citizenship is the century initiative. And I think, are you familiar with that, Alex? That
Sure.
group? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And so there, you know, there's a group who has a mission, right? Their purpose, they recognize the economic importance of that immigrants play, let alone everything that we've talked about today. And their purpose is to encourage growth in population in Canada to reach 100 million by 2100. And so,
Yeah, and I mean, it's not a simple goal, obviously, but it's one that
if
has
people would
been.
just stop dying, Alex, we could get this figured out. But the problem
Yes,
is
sure.
people don't live to the age of 200. So,
Right.
and I'm doing my part. Okay. I have 4 wonderful children. I'm doing my part to help with
Bravo, Mark.
the growth here. But some other people are not quite doing their part. And so immigrants are critical. And I know there's discussions that we've had numerous times. You can find them all over the place about the ratio between working adults and retirees and how that ratio is becoming,
Look,
smaller
I
and
have to tell
smaller.
you, my views on this have greatly evolved in the last 25 years. And 2021 Alex Stojicevic is now going to completely refute 2002 Alex Stojicevic.
This will be interesting.
So me back in 2002 was very much in the plug and play model of immigration, right? We should make it easy for people who have skills that we need, that don't cost us a lot to integrate, and move them straight into the economy. And, there it is. But, one of my sort of founding experiences in this business was academic a little bit. I had a diversion in 2011 where I taught at UBC and at the law school part-time. One of the most rewarding things I've ever done. I there exposed myself to some very, very bright people in some other departments that are neither law nor politics, but in geography and sociology and demographics. And it became abundantly clear from the discussions with them that the metrics around who should be Canadian is a very different story depending on how much you invest in the immigrant. So, for example, if you look at retention rates, our highest retention rate of immigrants tends to be second generation refugees, right? So refugees are the exact opposite of what I'm talking about, plug and play. You have to invest in them. You have to support them financially. You need to teach them English often. You need to help them get work. And they do better the more of this that you do. But the reality is, the payoff for Canada is second generation loyalty, which you simply do not have with the plug and play model. You just don't. I mean, this is the curse of being Canadian. Canadian means that if you're English, you're in an English-speaking world that includes New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, London, and if you're French, you have Paris beckoning as well. So you have other opportunities. You don't have to stay here if you don't want to. And the question becomes, how do we retain the people that we have? Not just how easiest it is to integrate them. And that's part of the debate that I think in our bar is often missed. And it's a view of mine that has evolved over time. And, so I would tend to think that the mix needs to be different from if you asked me in 2002, I would have probably said 70% economic, 30%, humanitarian categories. My view is very different today. I'm much closer to the 50-50 view.
Yeah. It's interesting with these changes that have been forced upon our government because of the pandemic and their desire to reach the levels, these lofty levels that they've set this year. There's some very, very interesting research that's going to occur here. First with this 176 draw, and then now these brand new streams, which if you're watching, if you looked at all the questions here, Alex, I did a video just yesterday. Let's see, today's Friday. Was it Wednesday that it was? Wednesday. It's Wednesday. Already over 10,000 views, and it's all about the new programs. And I will get to those, and I will demystify the programs. So hang tight, all of you who are asking questions about the new programs. But this is the big 176 draw. These changes are changing the face of the immigrant that we're now bringing in on the economic front. So human capital has obviously dropped down now with these, the 90,000 that are going to be coming in. Potentially these individuals are many of them are ones that may not have had an opportunity for permanent residence because they're in a low wage or low skill position. So organizations like the Conference Board of Canada, National Immigration Center, they're going to be able to now track these individuals in a longitudinal fashion and actually get data to show that, well, and in fairness here, full disclosure, I am a son of a Southern Alberta farmer, small little farmer. My father had grade 6 education. My mother had a grade 10. And I say repeatedly, how much did they contribute to the fabric of our community? Oh my goodness. My parents were leaders in the community. And I look at individuals, and and I've got lots of people that can debate the economics of long-term, how the benefits of someone who has higher capital versus lower human capital. And that's fine. But we're going to actually be able to see from a very, very empirical basis, from, focusing specifically on economics, and I'm sure there's other factors that they can assess too, whether or not all of our pre-held suppositions that human capital is the be all and end all, whether that actually holds water, because they're going to be able to track them through.
I don't disagree with you that this is going to be an interesting experiment. If I had to venture a guess, you're going to find that the metrics aren't significantly different, because human capital is a model that, as a model, is flexible. It doesn't require you to focus purely on English or on minimums or maximums or on competitiveness or on age or on other things. My great suspicion here is that you're going to find that that the results are going to be very similar to basically every other category that's economic, and that at the end, the policymakers will be scratching their heads and wondering, really, is there any point in picking somebody with 400 points versus somebody who picks 350?
Absolutely. And really right now, Alex, what we're doing for the open draws, we're choosing someone that has 468 points versus someone who has 467. Like the dividing line, you look at this past year, that's been
how is it meaningful?
It's like it's not statistically even relevant. And so, but you have to draw it somewhere. We've got levels. We have to have a cutoff. They haven't opened it up to the world. And so,
this raises the question of whether the selection thing even makes any sense. And there are days where I consider carefully that what we're doing for a living is all predicated on a selection system that largely misses the boat in terms of the demand side of this, right? In other walks of life, in these other academic disciplines, they look at law as a barrier. They don't look at law as anything more than a factor to take a look at. Instead, they look at what is pushing people to leave, right? And their study is on movements and the barriers to those movements. We, at the same time, look at how do we control inflows and how does our policy work in towards of selection. My view of this that's evolved over time is that really we need to focus on retention. Like at the end of the day, if you pick some 27-year-old wonder kid who has graduated from UBC and who is the best in his class in computer science or the best in her class in medicine at the med school, and you give that person permanent residence, and that person can now pick between here, San Francisco, or whatever plum job in Silicon Valley, etc., and no retention, is that person any more useful to us than a 32-year-old tradesman or tradeswoman who has completed a trade at BCIT? She's finished and she started working as a plumber. And then because we have a reasonable social safety net here, her and her spouse decide to have their family in Canada. Because, retention is very simple. Once your kids start school, if you have children, if you have family nearby, you tend to stay. To stay.
Absolutely.
And that's true, even if you could make 30, 40% more money somewhere else. So if retention's the purpose, then we have to think differently about our mix, it seems to me.
Yeah, very interesting. I know our discussion has kind of drifted into some other areas, but we just can't help it. It's so interlaced. Everything is interlaced. And so if you were to leave, as we kind of start to wrap up a little bit, if you were to, kind of have some parting comments, if you will, some parting thoughts on the role citizenship plays in all of this, what would they be, Alex? What if you were the people that are listening, and there's, like I said, we've got a bunch of people that are watching live that have been coming in and out, and I can see as we're doing our live session. But if you were speaking to them and they're trying to decide, well, even on this retention side, why this Canadian citizenship is something worth pursuing, what would you say?
Well, look, we still have the international reputation of being a safe, reasonable, orderly place that um, that comes with an assumption that you are reasonable, that you are temperate in your views, and that you are somebody that can be that you can come to consensus with. There are most other citizenships in the world label you in a pejorative way some way or the other. If the worst you can say about a Canadian is that they're too polite, in the international sphere, that's not such a bad thing.
No.
What I would ask people to do, though, is why, when policymakers are faced with a crisis and they have to put into operation priorities, what happens in Canada is that the citizen doesn't need to be a citizen to work or go to school or go about their daily lives. So as a result, this gets dropped on the priority list. Things that are much more important become much more, in their view, become more important, like maintaining work permits or renewing PR cards or other lines of business. But that's purely a product of internal workings in the department. What people need to do is tell their MPs, hey, I want to apply for citizenship, and I want to know what you're going to do about making sure that my application is processed in a timely way. Because look, they're holding people back from being citizens, from having a voice in the next election. Okay, and that to me is wrong fundamentally. Here we are asking people to take public health orders, all right, at face value. Take at face value that when Premier Kenny or Premier Horgan or Premier Ford walk out in front of the public, that you should do what they tell you because they're democratically elected and they have legitimacy. Whereas at the same time, you're not being allowed to vote because of something that has nothing to do with you, because they can't figure out how to do an oath ceremony online. That's wrong, okay? And you need to tell your MPs that that's wrong, and that when you do become a citizen, how they take your suggestion now is going to have a direct implication on a direct connection to how they are going to vote.
Yeah.
All right. And so this is the message that people need to take to their MPs of all political parties. This is the end of my journey, and I'm being told this isn't important because I can still go to work tomorrow. Well, I'm sorry. I am being asked to do all sorts of things, and I don't have a voice in any form as to whether or not they're legitimate. And that's simply wrong.
That's a great insight. That is really, really great insight. I hadn't even thought of that. Now, obviously, the power of the vote.
Hey, look, and this is not to say anything against the public health authorities. I religiously watch Bonnie Henry out here, and whenever I can, Ms. Hinshaw there in Alberta, who I think are doing a great job. But the fact is, I voted in the last election. As did most people that I know. And I have a stake in what's happened, and I have an understanding of where these decisions came from. So they're legitimate to me. But if I hadn't voted in this, then what's the difference between me and a guest who is being told what to do, right? Is Canada a hotel or is Canada a country, right?
Yeah.
So
very good. Yeah, that's very, very good points. This has been great. Thank you so much, Alex, for joining me today on Immigration Nation. And it was a lot of fun. If you saw the comments that were piling in from people, this channel tends to be devoted pretty heavily to those who are applying for permanent residence in all its forms. And with the announcement on Wednesday, a lot of the questions were revolving around that. But at the end of the day, I'm just going to shift down. I'll post the last one here, and it's simply this, and I'm going to echo this one as well. Ralph here says, thanks, Mark and Alex. And it's interesting because Ralph here is like a brother to me. He lives up in Edmonton. And Ralph, you'll remember he mentioned that he had a disability, a learning disability. And so the citizenship test would be a challenge for him. Well, he was one of the individuals that was able to get through express entry with an average score, with alternative measures that were put in place to allow him to average his scores. And that kind of thing right there, the ability for our country to recognize people of all different backgrounds, you know, to take into consideration and accommodate for various disabilities of individuals. And we could get into the whole discussion of medical inadmissibility, all these different things. But there is a place for someone like Ralph here. And we're in the process, you bet, just like you talked about, of getting waivers and things like that to allow Ralph to go through and take his citizenship test and get his Canadian citizenship. And that is why I love this country. That ability to accommodate the diversity of everything here that we experience, that we take for granted, that's what makes our country strong. So thank you so much, Alex. In the description, everyone, is a link. It says book a consult with Alex. Click on that link. Obviously, you can see who's the smarter lawyer here of the equation.
Oh,
So
come
make your
on.
decisions wisely and click on that link if there's anything. And obviously, we talked about citizenship here today. It's something Alex is passionate about. That's what I always ask the lawyers. Let's talk about something that you're passionate about. And you can see it here. But anything related to immigration, he does it all. So don't hesitate to reach out. And the whole purpose of this show is to highlight the wonderful lawyers, immigration lawyers that we have across the country. So thank you, Alex. I really appreciate you joining me.
Thank you very much for having me, Mark, and this was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Okay, you take care. We'll see you.
Okay, you too.